welcome you this evening to the Self-Determination Program Overview. I'm Alyssa DeFilippo. I manage Connections California, a program at Parents Helping Parents that is a statewide online resource and information hub for transition to adulthood and adult services. This evening, we are welcoming Evan Gilliland, who is a self-determination specialist with the San Andreas Regional Center. He's been with SARC for about 6 years now, and he previously was a technical expert on self-determination and responsible for training not only staff, but also the public on the self-determination program. And tonight, he's going to be sharing his knowledge with us. So we thank you for being here, and I'm going to stop my share and have Evan take it away. Thanks, Evan. You're muted.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. Happy to be here, happy to come and talk about self-determination. So again, my name is Evan Gilliland. I am a self-determination specialist at San Andreas Regional Center. So we serve the Santa Clara, Monterey, Santa Cruz, San Benito counties. And we are, every regional center is a different organization. So my information is specific to San Andreas Regional Center, but will mostly be applicable to all of the regional centers. But hopefully, just so you know, some of the details might be a little bit different. Some of their responses might be a little bit different per each regional center. Okay, so we're going to first be talking about what a regional center is. Hopefully, most of you know that already, but just in case if you don't, we're going to cover what a regional center is. We're going to go over what self-determination is, some key terms that you should know. We're going to talk about budgets and spending plans, everyone's favorite topics. And then we're going to talk about a roadmap to tell you everything you have to do from becoming interested in self-determination to actually using money from your self-determination funds. Okay. So we are here today to just hopefully give you enough information about self-determination, otherwise known as SDP. So self-determination program is SDP. I'm going to be using that acronym quite a lot. But we are here just to give you enough information to figure out if it's interesting to you and if you want to learn more about it. Various programs in the community, like the State Council on Developmental Disabilities or San Andreas Regional Center itself, hosts longer orientations as the first step when you're interested in self-determination. So that is going to be at least for SARC, it's a 2-hour presentation where they really dive into the nitty-gritty details of what the program is and how that regional center operates their self-determination program. So if you are interested after today, talk to your service coordinator and they can provide you the information on when the next orientation is. And that should be even more information if this is something that is interesting to you. Now, we will also have digital slides available that will be sent to you after the presentation by the lovely folks at Parents Helping Parents. Okay, so what is the regional center system? So the regional center system is a community-based, private, nonprofit corporation funded by the state of California to provide services to folk with developmental disabilities as required by law. Okay, so what does that mean? That means the government is paying the regional center system to provide services that they believe are necessary, right? And who does the regional center serve? The regional center serves people who are deemed substantially disabled and fall under one of those eligibility conditions that you see there. So traditionally, the regional center system provides a wide variety of services from at-home care to independent living support to job support, all sorts of different services. And that is the regional center system. No matter where you go in California, you will have a regional center. Obviously, if you leave the state of California, they will have their own services and supports that are there to support folk with disabilities. But the regional center is just California's response to that need. So what is self-determination? So self-determination is an alternative service delivery model at San Andreas Regional Center that allows the individual to have greater control over their government allocated funds at the cost of additional responsibility and liability. So I like to talk about it as the regional center is taking half a step back, and the families and the participants are taking half a step forward. So they're taking over some of those responsibilities, taking on some of that liability, so that they can have greater control over the services that they are utilizing, right? So in the traditional service model, SARC will reach out and find services for you. You'll talk about your needs. We'll go and find services that we think are appropriate, connect you to those companies. In self-determination, you are hunting down those companies yourself. You are finding and securing supports, or you're hiring people to help you do that. The major benefits of self-determination program is that you get to control the pay rate of your staff. You get to pay businesses who aren't affiliated with the regional center system. And you get to personalize your services to fit the participants' needs. No cookie cutter programs. You get to really personalize services to just what you need and not what you don't. Okay, so when might an individual benefit most from entering self-determination? So one area where they might have or success in self-determination is when there is a lack of available vendors in the traditional service model. So in the traditional service model, maybe you wanted tailored day services, but there are no tailored day service vendors available to you. And for those that don't know, tailored day service is just a program where it replaces a typical day program where instead of getting everyday service, you get one-on-one staff a couple times a week to come out and help integrate you into the community. So maybe that isn't available in your area due to staffing or available vendors, right? So in self-determination, you can still access all those funds, right? But even if there aren't the vendors there, so we can, ensure that you are getting appropriate supports, even if there are no available vendors. Okay. Another example is maybe self-determination might be for you if the available vendors don't meet the participant's needs. So maybe the participant is deaf, hard of hearing, and there are no day programs in your area that have staff who speak ASL or have ASL skills, right? Those day programs, right, are no longer what you need, what the participant needs. So in self-determination, you could take the funds that would have been allocated to a day program and use those to hire your own staff who has the ability to sign, and then they will be the ones who could potentially take them out into the community or fill that community integration need that the regional centers are agreeing with by even offering to fund a day program. Okay. Another one is if the individual, right, wants more control over their services. Maybe they just don't fit in at a local day program. They really want to craft their own program. They have really niche interests, right? They have goals and dreams that they want to pursue. Self-determination is great for that. And strong family networks make self-determination so much easier. So a strong family network is also a great, a great way that folk can benefit from self-determination. It really gives those families control and power in these situations where they can then control the services and make sure that the participant is getting the best services that they possibly can. Okay, so what are some key terms about self-determination that you should know about? So the first is person-centered plans. So what is a person-centered plan? A person-centered plan is where you sit down with a professional and make a document that tells the regional center and staff members everything that they would want to know about the participant. Okay, so what are their goals? What are their strengths? What are their dreams? What are their triggers? Right, everything that they should know about the participant that they're helping with. And how it helps with the regional center is it can really outline the needs of the participant and the needs that are then going to be met by your self-determination plan. So in self-determination, you get all of your money. Say, your regional center has allocated you $30,000 for your self-determination program. We'll get into how that's calculated later. You then have to plan how you're going to use that money, and a person-centered plan, really outlining what your needs are, and then figuring out where services you are going to purchase are going to fit into that plan, is really important. And it makes the whole self-determination journey a lot easier if you have a strong person-centered plan. So at least at San Andreas Regional Center, and I believe at every regional center, there are funds available for SARC to pay for these person-centered plans to be developed. So you shouldn't have to pay anything out of pocket. It's an optional service, but you can only access that money right at the beginning of your self-determination journey. So highly recommended to sit down, talk to your service coordinator about the funding available, and then go find a professional to sit down with and really make a plan for how you're going to enter self-determination. Now, a lot of the time, these individuals are proficient in self-determination, so they can also help answer questions that you may have about the program, that sort of thing. Now, most of the time when you are writing a person-centered plan, that person is going to be an independent facilitator as well. So what is an independent facilitator? An independent facilitator is someone who can help you manage your plan, your self-determination program. So in self-determination, you can pay anyone as long as they're an appropriate vendor, appropriate resource to meet the need that is identified. So you can pay a wide variety of people and programs. And so that can be a little bit overwhelming to think about. Who are we going to pay? What are they going to do for us? Is that better to pay them to do this or to spend our money elsewhere, right? Lots of decisions to be made and lots to think about. So an independent facilitator is someone you can hire who can help you make those decisions, help guide your plan or help guide your program. They can help you advocate with the regional center. They can help you hire and fire staff. They can, do really almost anything around planning your how to use or implementing your self-determination funds. Now, SARC doesn't give you any extra money to hire this individual. You'll have to take some of the money that we've already given you and then allocate that to this kind of middle manager, so to speak. That can be a great way to get extra help if all of this is sounding a little bit too complicated. Let me just check the chat real fast. Oh, look at all these lovely links. So I'll keep going. So the key term, home and community-based safety waiver. So San Andreas, or the California government, is moving away from the kind of developmental center era. That's what spawned the regional center system, right? We wanted folk out in the community. We wanted folk integrated as much as humanly possible while staying safe, right? And so the California government is very interested in ensuring that the participants' rights are being supported, and that their rights are being centered, their choices are being centered in the places that we are supervising them or helping them thrive, right? So we want to make sure that everything we're paying for with your self-determination program plan is giving the individual opportunities for choice, that it's giving them opportunities to engage with folk who do not have disabilities, right? That it's integrated into the community, and that they're the ones who are directing the services and choosing the services, right? Very important for our folk to feel like they have agency and control, and they are integrated in the community. So if you are paying for a service that might not be meeting those tenets, you might not be able to pay for it in self-determination. The vast majority of programs are going to be able to meet these requirements, but there might be if the regional center is at all concerned that something might not be meeting these qualifications, then you might just have to fill out a short questionnaire. Your service coordinator will be able to help you with that task. And then what is a financial management service? So this is one of the main draws of the self-determination program, is that in self-determination, you can hire your own staff, you can pay any company really that you'd like, as long as they're meeting the needs. And they are willing to work with this financial management service company. So typically in traditional services, you can only pay vendors. But we get around this by having the financial management service company be a vendor And then that financial management service company will then pay your staff and the businesses that you want to affiliate with. So they are the only required vendor in self-determination. You have to have a financial management service company. They're chosen by you. So you can interview and question those companies, decide what they're going to give you and how they're going to work with you, right? Very important steps. They are going to be there to check the backgrounds of all your staff. They're going to be there to make sure that the qualifications. So if you're hiring a therapist, we're going to that FMS company is going to make sure that that therapist actually has an active license. In SDP, you get, like I said, you get all your money right at the beginning of the year. So it's very easy to overspend, especially if you're paying overtime for staff or anything like that. So they're going to be sending you monthly reports on your spending. So, right, if you have $30,000, say, in your self-determination budget, they are going to be the ones who they're going to be sending you an update every month saying how much you have left, if you're on track to run out of money for the year, or if you have extra money for the year, you've used too little, that sort of thing. And they are going to be the ones onboarding your staff, making sure you're following California labor law, all those things that we don't expect you to know about as just typical folk in the community, but that we do need to ensure are happening. Like we would never want anybody to work or for you to have an employee where you didn't have workers' compensation insurance or liability insurance in place, right? And so the financial management service company is going to be ensuring that those basic requirements of being an employee in California are being met. Okay, and there are a few types of financial management services that you can work with. The first is the bill payer model of financial management service company. That's the simplest, and sole employer is kind of the most complicated, but we'll get into it. So the bill payer model for your financial management service company is for folk who don't want to hire any direct employees. They just want to pay companies and purchase items. So someone under the bill payer model might say they love their day program. They might continue to pay their day program even in self-determination. So there is actually no requirement that you can't use vendors in self-determination. So you can continue to use the vendors that you like if you so wish. And you can stop using the vendors that you don't want to work with anymore, right? And use other outside agencies. So that bill payer model allows you to pay companies and items. So maybe you have that day program that you love and you're continuing to pay. And then maybe you have a need for purchasing diapers. So then you are purchasing your diapers off Amazon, right? So that is somebody who could have their needs met under the bill payer model. But again, they cannot hire their own staff. So they can only pay companies and purchase items. And again, so then the most complicated, right, would be the sole employer model. This is for people who want to have the most control over their regional center services. They want to be the employer of record for that individual. They want to control the insurances available to that individual. And they want to hire their own staff. So in the sole employer model, the participant is the employer of record, which means that they are legally responsible for that employee. So in this case, if they were to illegally terminate that employee, and then that employee was to sue, they would be suing the participant, the employer of record. So there is a little bit of liability risk when you're taking on the sole employer model, but then you get to control the insurances related to that staff member. So maybe you want your staff members to have a high quality of medical insurance. So you're choosing to use your self-determination funds to purchase medical insurance for your staff, right? And so that is something that you can do in self-determination. And so the sole employer gives you the power and control over that. In the sole employer model, there is what's called employer burden rates. So whenever you're paying a employee in California, there are costs above just pay and wage, right? And so this is a bit of a complicated topic. And when you go to an orientation, you'll learn more about it. But essentially, if you're paying someone $20 an hour, right, it doesn't cost just that $20 an hour to employ them. It actually might cost closer to $23 an hour, or more than that, right? So say you have a 15% employer burden rate, so that it costs 15% extra to employ them to pay for that liability insurance, stuff like that. The workers' compensation insurance, the payroll taxes. That is all something that you will have to consider. The sole employer model tends to have a lower rate than, say, the co-employer model. So the co-employer model is for folk who want to hire their own employees, but don't necessarily want to take on all that risk associated with being the employer of record. So in this case, the FMS, the Financial Management Service Company, is the employer of record for the participants. They're going to still be doing everything that they're doing in the sole employer model, but the employer burden rate is typically going to be a little bit higher in this co-employer model because the FMS is taking on the risk of being that employer of record. So again, with the bill payer model, you could get no employees, but you can pay for companies' services, and you can pay for specific items. The FMS will go purchase items for you. The sole employer model is the most freedom, right? You can control the insurances, you're the employer of record, but again, there's a little bit more risk. In the co-employer model, you can hire your own staff, just like the sole employer model. You can pay companies and purchase items, just like the bill payer model, but you are unable to be that employer of record and control those insurances. The FMS is the one who's purchasing those through their employer burden rates. Okay, so those are kind of the three models of FMS. Again, when you take an orientation, they're going to talk more about each one of these and you're going to get more information. But essentially, you're going to have to pick one of these three categories. And then that is how you are going to purchase items through your self-determination funds. Now, there are a couple ways that an FMS can pay for things for you. There are really three ways. They can hire staff on directly for you, and then those staff can submit a time card, which you approve. Okay, that's the co-employer and sole employer model. You can do that. Their businesses can send you an invoice. So then the FMS, you will then approve the invoice, and the FMS will then pay that company the amount, right? And then the third way is that the FMS company can go purchase items online for you. So those are really the three ways that you're going to be getting money out of your self-determination program plan. And we'll talk more about how much money you get. I think that's actually coming up here. So now that we have hopefully a knowledge of the key terms about self-determination, we'll talk about two terms that you're going to hear a lot when you're in orientations or when you are talking to other families. So the two key terms are your STP budget and your spending plan. So your self-determination program budget is how much money we are giving you to use in self-determination. Your self-determination spending plan is how you are going to use that money to purchase necessary services. So again, the budget is the amount that we're giving you to work with, and the spending plan is how you're using that money. So those two things do not have to be aligned. Typically, they will need to generally align, right? So if we're paying money for community integration for a day program, we're putting that on your budget. We would like to see some community integration on the spending plan, but it doesn't have to be a budget. It doesn't have to be a day program, right? And it doesn't have to be exactly one-to-one. So if we added $20,000 for community integration, that doesn't mean you have to spend exactly $20,000 on community integration on your spending plan. Okay, so how is your budget made? Your budget is how much money we would have spent on you in the traditional services in 1 year. So we don't want people to enter self-determination, just to access additional funds. We want them to be in self-determination if they are interested in really controlling and personalizing their programs. So a person with the same needs where vendors are available would hopefully have the same amount of money available to them in traditional services as they get in self-determination. So it's supposed to be a cost-neutral program. And so that is based on, again, so your budget is based on traditional service costs. An example of that is, say you need counseling services and you don't have insurance, right? In the traditional service model, SARC would pay for a counselor for you through maybe like Hope Services. If we deemed it all the generic services weren't available, you had no applicable insurances that would cover it, right? SARC might step in at that point and help pay for some therapy, but we are going to add the costs that that we would incur if we were to send you to our therapist. But that doesn't mean you have to use our therapist. So in self-determination, maybe we add $30 an hour for therapy on your self-determination budget. Then on your self-determination spending plan, you say, well, actually, I want to use this other therapist who's more expensive. Maybe they're $50 an hour, right? So that is your choice in self-determination. You can pick the more expensive counselor, but what is that going to mean? That's going to mean you have less total hours of therapy available to you. Because if we gave you $30 an hour for therapy, and then you're choosing to spend $50 an hour on it, that's your right, that's your choice. But we're not going to increase your budget just because you want to pay a higher therapist, right? So it's all based on that traditional service cost. So we'll get into the more about the budget here. So how do we figure out how much money you have on your budget? Again, like I said, the total amount of money on your budget is based on how much was spent in the last 12 months. In SARC terms, this is called a budget expenditure report. Other regional centers might have different names for this sheet, but essentially your service coordinator should be able to provide you with a list of the costs that you incurred, right? And then that should show you where they're getting these numbers, right? It should show what months you billed, that sort of thing. And then, of course, if maybe you only had a day program for half the year, then that is going to be approximated to the whole year. So maybe you spend $6,000 on your day program for half the year and you wanted to enter self-determination, then that would be doubled because it needs to last the whole year, right? In self-determination, you get all of your money right at the beginning. So you need to have enough money to make it through your whole 12 calendar months. So that'll be adjusted for you. Of course, any unmet needs would be accounted for as well. So maybe you needed Taylor Day service, but there were no vendors available to you. It says Taylor Day services on your IPP that the service coordinator has been trying to send referrals. In that case, right, SARC agrees that that service is needed. Just we were unable to locate that particular service. So in that case, the money would then be added as if we could pay, as if there were a vendor available. That's what then would be added to your self-determination budget. And then, of course, things change. Services and natural supports change as life progresses. So say an individual lived out on their own in their own apartment. They had really high needs. They needed 24/7 supervision out in their own apartment. And then they moved back home into the family home. Obviously, they might not need that 24/7 supervision anymore because now they're in the family home. There's natural supports available to them, right? Obviously, their budget would go down. And the same if something else happened, right? So if they moved out into their own apartment, then even if we're in the middle of a budget year and your self-determination program budget is set, the budget can change based on circumstances. So then if they moved into their own apartment, we're going to increase services if it's appropriate, right? And ensure that the individual has the supports required to thrive in whatever setting they are in. So the budget can go up and down. And then, of course, we are only going to be able to add money to the budget for things that we would pay for in traditional services. So if you were in traditional services and you couldn't receive funding for it, then you're not going to be able to receive funding for it in self-determination. So those are your budget basics. So again, your budget is how much money we're giving you to work with. Your spending plan is how you are going to spend that money. So every regional center has a little bit of a different spending plan. SARC's spending plan is just an Excel spreadsheet, if you've ever seen an Excel spreadsheet. Essentially, it's going to be a one-page document that has various lines for what you're going to pay for. On each line, you're going to write, I want to pay respite support staff $20 an hour for 200 hours a month, or 200 hours, yeah, a month. And then that will, at least San Andreas Regional Center form, will auto calculate how much that's going to cost you, right? So then you'll put that on your spending plan, and then that's how much funds would be allocated to that service that you want to purchase. So maybe you have a $30,000 self-determination budget. If you were writing it up, you might write, I want to pay $10,000 for respite support staff. So maybe that ends up being $20 an hour for X number of hours. And that's what you would put on there. And it does all the math for you. But the most important thing with the spending plan is that it's at or below your total budget amount, right? So obviously, if we gave you $30,000 to work with, we're not going to approve a spending plan that has $50,000 of payments. So you want to make sure that it matches the budget that was signed and provided to you by your service coordinator. Now, so you're going to put all those lines, you're going to fill out all those lines to determine what you're going to pay for on your spending plan. There are a few things that you have to think about when trying to figure out if something can be paid for through your self-determination budget. The first is that, obviously SARC has laws regulating what can or cannot be paid for, and those are given to us by the California government. So the first is that whatever we're paying for has to be federally recognized. So what does that mean? That means that whatever you are hoping to purchase has to be proven that it's going to meet the need associated with that purchase. So SARC is never going to pay for anything that isn't a need or isn't related to the disability, right? So say you came to the regional center and you said, my child has lots of behaviors. I have all these insurance denials saying my insurance won't pay for behavior analysts, all this. I've done all my generic resource removal. And we want to pay for a behaviorist to come in and see if they can reduce the amount of behaviors that the individual is performing. So that would be a federally recognized service because it's been proven through science that a behaviorist has a strong likelihood of reducing behaviors in folk who have disabilities. Okay, now what is a non-federally recognized service? So maybe I always have a hard time thinking up examples for non-federally recognized services. But say you want to purchase spices to reduce the behavioral incidents at school or at day program is a better example, right? If there's no science-backed, evidence-based practices that are supporting the purchase of that spice leading to the reduction of behaviors, then we're not going to be able to pay for it, right? And it would be, so that is what a federally recognized service. So it has to be backed up by science that what we're purchasing will meet the need that is causing the request for funding, right? So that is the first thing you have to think about. The second thing is that home and community-based safe services waiver compliance? So that's what we were talking about earlier. That's HCBS, Home and Community-Based Services Waiver. So again, are we paying for something that is offering choices to the individual? Are they choosing to be there? Is it an integrated space, right? Is it respecting the participants' rights? Those are all things that are important. So we want to make sure that whatever we're putting on the spending plan is HCBS compliant. Now, you're only really going to have to think about this when you're paying for services that are meant for groups of individuals with disabilities. So if I were to be wanting to add a ballet class to my spending plan, if anyone can walk in and gain access to that ballet class, right, through a website, or like a typical adult teenager could then join that class, right? We don't really have to worry about HCBS compliance. Where we worry about HCBS compliance is when we have settings that are meant for folk with disabilities and typical folks cannot enter those spaces. So there we're maybe worried that one individual's choices and needs are being put over another individual's needs, right? Gone are the days, or I think we're trying to move away from places like sub-minimum wage workshops and move more into community integrated jobs where folk are working alongside typical individuals. Of course, we're only going to pay people who are qualified to do the job. So if we added money, or you want to pay for a nurse on your spending plan, we can't pay, anyone who is off the street to be a nurse. We actually have to pay a nurse to be providing those services. So if your spending plan, says a nurse staff member, then your FMS is going to be making sure that they meet those qualifications and that they have licenses, right? So we're never going to pay a behavioral analyst who doesn't have the appropriate certifications, that sort of thing. And none of these rules are new. You're all, in the traditional service model, all our traditional vendors also fall under these rules. But in self-determination, you are experiencing these as the consumer for the first time, right? Because you are the one who is going out and looking for your staff. And so one example of that is payer of last resort. So even in the traditional service model, if another government agency or program can pay for something, then they need to be paying for it before we access SARC funding, right? So an example, you needed a wheelchair, you wouldn't come to SARC first. You would go to your insurance because it's a medical need, right? So first you would go to your insurance, make sure that try and get your insurance to pay for the wheelchair, talk to your doctor, figure that out. If you can't access generic resources or your insurance denies your claim, that's when you then come to SARC and say, okay, maybe this thing is needed, but insurance won't pay for it. Can SARC potentially pay for it? Right. And so that is actually written into law that San Andreas Regional Center and all regional centers are payers of last resort. So that's something you're going to have to think about. Again, same as traditional services. Another great example of this is in-home supportive services, which can pay for supervision of an individual. So we are going to want to make sure that, something like IHSS, in-home support services, is utilized prior to asking SARC to pay for supervision of the individual. And then finally, of course, as you know, in self-determination, you can pay vendors or non-vendors. One important thing to know is that background checks are typically only provided for folk who provide direct personal care to the individual, but that you as the participant or the family of the participant can request that that all staff have background checks, but that is something that you would have to request of your financial management service company. But they will be telling you all about this as you move forward in the program. Okay, and so how do you figure out your spending plan? Is it going to have a drop-down menu on how you can, or what services you can or can't pay for? On the Department of Developmental Services website, that's DDS, on their website, you can find a list of all of these services and like long paragraphs describing each one of these things. Your service coordinator is going to help you find which one's most appropriate. But essentially everything you pay for is going to fall into one of these categories. So say you're paying respite services, it's going to fall into that respite services category. If you're paying for employment supports, it's going to fall under employment supports, right? I wouldn't worry too much about this, but just know that there are long descriptions of each of these that can really help you figure out what you can and can't pay for under self-determination. And if you attend SARC's orientation, we provide that document to you so that you can read through and figure out everything you can and can't pay for, right? Really learn about all of the regulations around these services and the thought process of the government when it comes to funding. So that is something that can be provided by your local regional center or from the Department of Developmental Center Services website. Now, your spending plan can change. Obviously, no plan survives every year flawlessly. So, if you get halfway through the year, things can change. That's okay. The important thing to recognize is it can take a long time to change a spending plan. So you really want to make sure that your spending plan is as accurate as you can, because sometimes spending plan changes can't happen for, it can take like a month to 3 months, depending on your financial management service company and your regional center, to get changes put through to your spending plan. So you really want that first spending plan to be as accurate as you can. Okay, so again, just to reflect your budget versus your spending plan. Your budget is how much money you have to use, and it should be reflective of traditional services. And then your spending plan, right? It doesn't have to match the budget, but it must be reflected in your IPP. So your individual program plan is still going to be around. An important thing to mention there is that we can't ever pay for anything that is not on your IPP. So you want to make sure that when you're sitting down with your service coordinator, write that individual program plan, that you're talking about everything you're hoping to pay for in your self-determination year, right? So that they can make sure to include that in your individual program plan. Now, of course, your IPP can change, so don't worry too much about it if something does change mid-year. Okay, so what is your roadmap for entering self-determination? The first step is attend a self-determination orientation. So at SARC, that's that 2-hour orientation presentation I was talking about. Your service coordinator can connect you, provide you details on the soonest orientations that are available, or they can point you in directions for other agencies that have available orientations. Once you attend the orientation, you're going to learn a lot more about the program. And that's when you're going to want to call your service coordinator and tell them you're interested, right? Communicate with the regional center about the program and maybe start looking for financial management service companies. Some financial management service companies can have significant wait times to get into their programs. So that can be a bottleneck or a barrier to entry into self-determination. So it can help to talk to some of these programs pretty early on. While you're doing that, I would also hold an IPP meeting with your service coordinator, right? We want to talk about the services that we're going to use in self-determination. Before this, we're also going to want to work on that person-centered plan with a independent facilitator. Hopefully, the person-centered plan will be integrated into your IPP. After that, your service coordinator is going to provide you a individual budget. So how much money they think is appropriate based on your IPP meeting, right? Based on all the needs you brought up. Once you get that, you are going to write your spending plan. So you can do that in coordination with your service coordinator or with a hired on independent facilitator. But again, self-determination is all about personal choice and responsibility. So it's really on the participant and their family to decide what they're going to put on their spending plan and how they're going to use this money. It can be a bit of work to put one together, but you're going to put one together. Your service coordinator can help you, but again, you're going to be leading that process. And then you're going to want to go get that spending plan signed by your service coordinator's upper management. And after that, you're going to be ready to enter self-determination once you have an FMS willing to start services with you. Okay, so again, next steps, attend an orientation, decide if you want to go forward, and then talk to your service coordinator. Those are the most important next steps. And then once you have connected with them, they're going to be guiding you through the rest of the process. Okay, so here's just another form of that, right? When you're ready to enter self-determination, you're going to have a person-centered plan. That's optional. You're going to have a completed IPP. You're going to have that signed budget and spending plan. You're going to have those HCBS assessments if necessary. Your service coordinator will tell you if they're required. And then the FMS is willing to take you on. One thing that you should do is make sure that the start date is out far enough that you have time to hire all your staff and be ready to start services once you've officially switched over. So say you plan to start July 1st when self-determination, you're going to want to make sure that you have all your staffing onboarded with the FMS or hired by the FMS prior to that 7/1 start date, because you can use traditional services all the way up through the end of June in this example, but starting 7/1, you wouldn't be able to use them anymore. You have to then they have to then be paid through their financial management service company. So that is everything you're going to want to have ready prior to starting self-determination. Thank you so much for coming. It's a lot of information in just 45 minutes. So I tried to include all of the most important information, but now we'll kind of jump into a Q&A portion. And again, highly encouraged, go attend a local orientation. You'll learn so much information. 2 hours is a lot more time. So you'll be able to really decide if this is something for you. But hopefully today gave you enough information to get you to go talk to your service coordinator about it with a little bit of confidence.
Right. Well, you delivered. It's a self-determination program overview. That is
Yes.
what you delivered. So we thank you. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
Thank you
Evan.
so much for having me.